Hi, my name is Jonas, and I have been invited to share some thoughts around digital design ethics and some principles we have defined on this topic. First, being middle-aged, I got the chance to experience the early days of internet. For those of you who wasn't there, it was like the Wild West, with very few rules. But it was also completely disconnected from physical reality. What happened on the internet had very little impact on my everyday life, my personality, and my identity. Nowadays, of course, it's an entirely different thing. Our digital life is an integrated part of how societies are taking shape. A big part of our interplay takes place in the digital world, and it affects people's everyday lives and well-being in a very real way. I like to use this image as a reminder that design decisions can have big impact on people, and that we need to design digital artifacts responsibly. That little design decision early in the process can have big consequences later on. But as designers, we also have the opportunity to influence how society should take shape. We're kind of at the wheel in this digital endeavor. Important as it may be, ethical discussions aren't that common in everyday digital design. Ethical requirements for a product or service typically don't get much attention, and in most cases, there is no pronounced responsibility for this in a product team. Accessibility perhaps being an exception, where there often is someone responsible. And the field of AI is perhaps another exception, where ethics is addressed at a political and regulatory level. So why don't ethics get the attention it deserves? I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing many of us think of ethics as something diffuse and difficult. It's hard to become specific and express tangible requirements around these questions. And as with all value-based decision-making, it can be hard to agree on where to draw the line. At our design agency, we spent quite a bit of time pondering around this. How can we define some kind of ethical guidelines that are tangible enough and universal enough for everyone to agree upon? Then, of course, we realized this had already been done. The Declaration of Human Rights are universal ethical principles that most of the world have already agreed upon. But when revisiting these principles, we felt they were not always fitted to digital aspects of a modern society. So we decided to rewrite them into 10 digital principles and to write them in the format of user needs so that they easily can be incorporated in the requirements of any artifact. And we are a design agency, not philosophy professors, so it might seem a little bit pompous to start rewriting the UN principles. But we really needed something to lean on in our design projects. So we decided to give it a try. Maybe we got it right, maybe we didn't. It's really up to each and everyone to decide whether you can stand behind this or not. And I'll try to comment these 10 principles briefly. If any of you find them interesting and want to read up on them later, they are available at digitaldesignethics.com. The first principle, freedom, is quite fundamental. Everyone should be treated with dignity and have their human rights respected. When doing digital design, we should try to think of ways any product could potentially be misused, because once it's out there, it may be too late. And I think it's important to have an idea of what you believe is morally right or wrong before even starting to do any design. Protection also feels pretty obvious. Everyone should feel safe and protected also in the digital world. But interpersonal interactions are a delicate phenomenon. There may be reason to think a little extra when designing digital platforms that maintains our social togetherness. Because how a digital artifact is designed may affect our possibilities to behave nicely towards each other. Cyberbullying is perhaps a good example, where the digital environment doesn't always allow fellow human beings to react or intervene in the same way as the physical world allows for. Being equal before the law is probably something most take for granted. From a UX perspective, this is really about not completely getting off track, constructing something that can be misused for illegal purposes. But it's easy to be gullible and not expect the things you design can be abused. Take, for example, the app, This Is Your Digital Life. An innocent small app where users answer questions and get a psychological profile. I would guess those who designed this app didn't have in mind that its collected user data would be used for targeted campaigns in a presidential election and result in billion-dollar fines. Freedom of choice, then. Reasonably, everyone should be able to choose what they want to engage in and which digital products and services they want to use. But it's not always straightforward designing it that way. As more and more of our social and practical life gets a digital extension, it also becomes more difficult to choose to stand outside. Even so, I still think that each individual should be able to make that choice. Yeah, digital privacy and integrity has been addressed from a political point of view, as with the EU's GDPR legislation. So far, this has mostly resulted in an absurd flow of cookie banners and dialogues about consent on websites. But the political engagement around this also reflects how little regard digital artifacts has taken for individuals' privacy and what economic value user data has. Because user data has so much potential value, there's every reason to be vigilant as a designer. Ask yourself if the data being collected is really necessary and whether the information collected is in the benefit of its users. If the main business of a product is to collect data, then I would think twice about designing it at all. Freedom of expression has long been close to the heart in the democratic parts of the world. And the freedom to express one's thoughts and opinions should be indisputable, even in the digital landscape. But this is not an uncomplicated question either. Should I, for example, be allowed to express myself in any way anonymously without taking the consequences of the reactions that occur? Should the large digital platforms where much of the social debate takes place have the right to censor or suspend people? Or should freedom of expression apply without reservation there as well? Do we need strict rules for the opinions you choose to express when your message can get out to millions of recipients? My attitude is nevertheless that freedom of expression is and should be a fundamental principle. It applies and is legislated in the analog world and should also apply digitally. Information is hardly a scarce commodity in our time. Quite the contrary. We find it difficult to take in, orient ourselves, and relate to all the information that flows over us. But having access to information, being able to enrich one's intellect and understand and learn things about the world is a fundamental right. How much of society's digital information flows do we want to be open and accessible? What kind of information do we think should be withheld from the public? For example, what can I expect from a search engine? How much of my search results can be paid ads without losing information neutrality? what kind of information is reasonable to charge for, and what information should be free and available for everyone. I think most people can agree that access to neutral information is essential for a functioning democracy. In this context, inclusion is about inviting as many as possible to take part in a digital service or product. And this principle is related to principle number 4, which deals with freedom of choice, but we chose to lift this one as a separate principle. If a digital service is not possible to use for those who have some form of disability, then there is also no freedom of choice for them. User influence is perhaps the very foundation of UX design. But what we want to emphasize a little extra is the macro perspective. The digital layer of how our society is shaped should be as important to have an opinion about as, for example, urban planning and how the city we live in should be shaped for us to feel comfortable living there. Giving users influence over how the digital landscape is shaped helps us to design a richer flora of services and tools that have a positive impact in the individual's everyday life and society at large. And last but not least, peace of mind. It's very easy to think that the particular product you are working with is more important than all others. And it's easy to forget that each individual juggles a decent amount of different services and tools every day. The problem is that our cognitive capacity and ability to concentrate have not changed much in the last 200,000 years or so, while the competition for our attention only increases. And I think it might be worth considering how much of people's attention a product should really cost. Do we really need that notification that makes users spend more time with the service than they really should or need to? Sometimes the great value of a digital service can be that it relieves the user and makes it possible to direct their undivided attention to something more important. Right, so those were the 10 principles. Hopefully they are not too controversial. But talk is cheap. The big hurdle is perhaps not agreeing upon ethical principles, but to start working actively with them in your daily work. I'll try to give some suggestion on how to overcome that. Right, so how do you start applying these principles in your daily work? It's really a tricky question. I guess it depends on your situation and your way of working. But perhaps the starting point would have to be to ask yourself, what is my ethical standpoint as a designer? Either these principles fit your moral compass, or you need to adjust them into something you feel you can stand behind. The important thing is that once you have phrased your own moral standpoint around these questions, it will definitely influence your design decisions. And when you have a fairly clear idea on where you stand ethically, try evaluating digital products around you. Looking at your previous work, would you have designed it the same way today? Have a look at the digital artifacts you used yourself. How would they score from an ethical perspective? Are you still comfortable using them? And when it comes to daily design work, if you feel inspired to start designing more ethically, start small. Find somewhere it hurts the most and commit to making a change. Once you can prove a change for the better, people around you will start picking up interest in your work, and the ethics and the ethics perspective will start to gain traction. At least that's my experience. And about getting others on board, how can that be done? First thing, let's just hope it's in every human's DNA to want to make this world a better place. It's more fun and meaningful building things when you feel it's for the greater good. But sometimes we all need a little help along the way. To make ethics relevant in the daily work, you may need to become the ambassador of this topic, run a lecture or hold a workshop, get the discussion going with your team. Which ethical requirements should be met with the specific artifact you are developing? It can also be a good idea to do some research on, on how your product or service is performing ethically. How are your users experiencing the ethics of your product right now? Once your colleagues realize ethical aspects have an impact on user satisfaction, the motivation to work actively on this tends to rise. And by measuring your product's ethical performance, you will also have a benchmark for future design efforts. Of course, addressing ethical in digital design isn't smooth sailing all the time. We face challenges trying to implement these principles all the time. Not in the sense that people or clients reject having ethics in their design, but more in that it gets low priority once time and budget targets are being set. If you have your ethical requirements defined early in a project, I think there's a bigger chance they will fit into the budget. And just to have these principles written down and to be able to discuss them early in a project has helped us giving ethics more attention. Not that we succeed in every aspect and always make the perfect ethical design, but at least we are working actively with this and try a little bit harder than before. And of course, being a smaller design agency, we can always simply decline any client we feel doesn't match our moral values. This happens, but not very often. By just thinking about ethical aspects of design, having your own values explicitly formulated, we feel it has become easier to just talk it through with clients. And we find that most people are actually quite engaged in questions around digital ethics. It's just that we rarely talked about this before. Okay, so that was my 2 cents about digital design ethics. I hope it was of some value for you and that you feel somewhat more inspired to start working actively with the ethical perspective in your own design work. So I wish you the best of luck and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Cheers.